I'm here to help women reset and rewild, to embrace and prioritize the pauses in order to reclaim their peace and power. I'm Dr. Michelle Peris, director of the Poppy Clinic and founder and CEO of the Wild Collective. As a disruptor, naturopathic doctor, wife, and mama, I've created a global movement and sacred space for women to rise together. Here, you'll break through limitations, romanticize your life, and unlock the magic of your divine feminine power. My life's work is rooted in community, lifting women into their most powerful, authentic selves, while empowering clinicians to elevate their practices with a transformational, community-driven model. I lead a thriving, passion-fueled business and naturopathic practice brimming with abundance, where I can guide women to invigorate their lives through sisterhood and elevate healthcare with a cutting-edge transformational approach. I've witnessed firsthand in my practice how this model sparks consistent health transformation, creates flourishing communities, and brings profitable success. You can have it all, a life filled with abundance, contagious joy, and untethered potential. So pull up a seat. It's time to pour into yourself and tap into your intuition and design a life that's wild, free, and uniquely yours. And I'm going to show you how. This is Wild Medicine. All right, welcome back to another episode of Wild Medicine. I am your host, Dr. Michelle Peris, and today's episode is on trauma's BFF, grief. Who wants to listen to that? I went to, in these couple of months that I took off, one of the really wonderful things I got to do is I got to go to an event in Calgary, which, if you don't know me that well, is my hometown. And there was this really amazing event that I was invited to by my beautiful friend, Jen Pike. And shout out to her because she is a lovely human. And I was really, really wanting to go, and she helped make that possible. So I went to this Monetize Your Mind event, and I was really excited about it. And I just felt like I was supposed to go. I didn't know why. I wasn't, I'm not one to need to look at all the I'm not a details person. In my Colby score, I'm a 10 out of 10 quick start. So I just need like a feeling like something is in alignment, and I want to do that thing. So based on the host of the event and everything that I had been reading, I really felt like I wanted to go. And what I didn't expect was all of the emotions that were going to come up for me from this really beautiful event. And that really led to planting seeds around this idea of grief and how grief makes a lot of us really uncomfortable, and being privy to working with women in a really vulnerable way, let's say, because fat loss, weight loss, however you want to look at my program Shed, I have very vulnerable conversations with women. And so I have the absolute pleasure of really understanding how we think, where our, in the Wild Collective, and we have really vulnerable conversations around subject matters that matter to us. And so I feel I have a really good, healthy understanding of, where a lot of us can get tripped up. And one of my favorite lines that came from that event was that trauma has a really great PR team. And I would agree with that statement, right? I feel like we've come a long way with trauma, and we are really comfortable talking about it. We're comfortable reading about it. There's a lot of social presence around trauma and how that affects us and how it affects our health and our overall quality of life and well-being. Like, I really feel like trauma has been in its center stage era where there's a greater understanding and compassion for it. One of the books we read in Fellow Wild talks about this concept of woundology. And so I think we've even gone so far as trauma bonding together. So even finding human connection and interpersonal relationship connection through our shared trauma experiences. And that also has its potential flaws, as in, we can get stuck. We can get stuck continuously what's the right word? Like repeating, or, doesn't matter what the word is per se, because you probably get what I'm going at. But like, we can get really stuck in the cycle of talking about our trauma that gets us entrenched in the story. And that's what Caroline Mice was speaking to around this woundology, is this collective healing, or lack thereof, actual healing, but bonding over a shared or similar trauma experience. And that being the reason that people are connecting, and therefore preventing themselves from transforming or alchemizing beyond it, because it's just this repeated narrative that bonds them. And so there actually is this relational benefit that is happening by having a shared trauma experience. Anyways, no matter where you see yourself on that spectrum, I think you would agree with me that trauma has certainly gotten the attention that it deserves. And we're a lot more comfortable with the idea of it. But grief is not something many of us are comfortable with. And, I always say this to women in Shed, but and Wild, that there is a huge difference between intellectualizing content or information and actually being the embodiment and the understanding, the lived experience of that. What do I mean by this? I mean, we could intellectually say, no, I get grief, Michelle. Like, grief is when something bad happens and those sad emotions come up for us, and it's there. Except for the interesting thing about grief is that it sneaks up on you. And that was something that was brought up. There was a woman there who's speaking on, she helps people on their deathbed, essentially, write their story and process their emotions. And I mean, it was so beautiful listening to her. And she read one of the letters, and pretty amazing stuff. I even coached a nurse who wanted to become a death doula. And, it's a shame, because I think people hearing about that being a profession or a thing, I think it would scare the bejeezies out of people, and they wouldn't even entertain it. Yet 100% of us, 10 out of 10 of us, are going to die. And we are really uncomfortable with that concept. And we're really uncomfortable with the concept of the loss of loved ones. Actually, maybe even more so, because you have to live through the experience of grief. Not only do we grieve people, but we grieve things that don't work out. We grieve things not said. There's so many things that can cause us a level of grief. And so it was so interesting. I love this about myself, that I just really felt like I was supposed to be there. And so I went and I cried more than I have ever cried at an event. I didn't think I particularly had anything to process. And then we did this awesome breath work. There were these really beautiful talks that were hosted, met really awesome people, really like-minded people. There's such a value of being in the room of people who think very similar to yourself. I love diversity of thought. If you've been listening for a while, you really do know my stance on that. I celebrate that. And it's really nice to have pockets of time when you're in a room where it feels so safe. Say anything and you're not going to offend anyone, because you're all so like-minded in that capacity, in terms of celebrating diversity of thought, of having different opinions, of not having to follow the status quo or whatever mainstream narratives are considered palatable, tolerable, and acceptable. I felt like that was the right space. Anyways, there was so much around grief at this event, and I had a lot of grieving to do. There is a lot of things I've probably alluded to that didn't work out the way that I thought they were going to, mostly career focused. And even though I had accepted that and really had already started paving my own way of like where my next passion and energy was going to be focused on, I still probably hadn't fully let myself grieve what didn't work out the way I thought it was going to. And that's what came creeping up on me unexpectedly, and I cried a lot. And I feel like it gave me this beautiful opportunity of really getting to feel what still needed to be alchemized, what emotions still had to be alchemized through me, so I could fully let go and move beyond. And grief deserves an episode all on its own, but much like death, maybe no one will listen. I was joking this week to the women in Wild how no one listened to my death podcast, and they were like, we did, which they're my people, so I get it. Grief deserves it deserves better PR, because as processing or alchemizing any emotions deserves greater PR. For a lot of us with this good girl conditioning and this hyper independent woman that has been built because of the good girl conditioning, we're not really comfortable feeling our feelings. And I see this in the weight loss space deeply. And when we start to shed what no longer serves us, guess what comes up? A lot of unprocessed emotions. And so of course, by no accident, I go through things so that I can help coach and support others go through similar paths. It's actually my deepest honor and privilege. I think that's why I throw myself in uncomfortable situations. What you might not know about me is that I hate going to events. I hate putting myself in situations where I feel alone, vulnerable, or potentially not accepted. All of my old inner child stuff kicks up and I act super weird. And actually, you know what, I'm going to record a 2-parter on just surrendering to that experience, because it was a really, really beautiful experience. Finally letting that go and just trusting. But I just was not aware how much unprocessed grief I still held. And it came and slapped me in the face. And I let myself fully alchemize those feelings and process those feelings, because I knew I actually wouldn't be able to move into the next phase of building my beautiful life and impacting more people if I didn't let myself feel the feelings. And this is what I talk to a lot of women about in Shed and in Wild. It's where we get stuck. It's where we continue to pattern and feel numb and not in the pulse of our life, because we are avoiding feeling and alchemizing the emotions that are begging to be expressed and felt, so that you can transform beyond that. And I get that at an intellectual level, of course, right? But to actually let myself grieve and cry. There was this one breathwork session. I'll never forget it for the rest of my life, because I cried my bloody face off. And I'm not sure I've ever fully done that in a breathwork session like that before, but the amount of presence I felt after that, the just calm and peace in my body, and this like invigoration and energy in my body, it was it's an unforgettable moment where you're like, I'm going to hold on to this. This is really important information, how important our breath is, how important it is to let ourselves feel our feelings. I've talked about it before on the podcast, but in case you're new here, 1, welcome, and thank you for being here. And 2, it is just important to re-emphasize that when an emotion comes up, and I really also want to preface this, that there are no bad parts of us. This episode is brought to you by the Poppy Clinic. We are an integrative naturopathic clinic located in Ontario, Canada, and we support you in finding clarity in your healthcare journey. Whether you are looking for an in-depth one-on-one care naturopathic experience or IV infusion therapy, acupuncture, cosmetic acupuncture, or hormone replacement therapy, we are your health care hub. Why the name Poppy? It's because we wanted women to feel such clarity in their health that they could separate poppy seed from soil. If you are looking for that level of clarity and are ready to reclaim your health, feel vibrant, and know your power, and are located in Ontario, then we are the clinic for you. We look forward to seeing you very soon at the Poppy Clinic. You can check us out and learn more at poppyclinic.com. So many of us feel shame, embarrassment, and guilt and unworthiness for feeling certain things. And that stems back from childhood and things that were maybe said to us about us not being allowed to have those big emotions, or making other people or caregivers uncomfortable for expressing such emotions. And so somewhere along the way, we took the bait and we stopped accepting or allowing ourselves to feel especially unsightly or ugly emotions or feelings. And when feelings come up, good, bad, ugly, rageful, the invitation is to welcome that for being there. It's like an old friend. It's like a part of you that just wants to be witnessed and seen. And when emotions like trigger our attention like that, I think it's really important to note that there is a cycle to alchemizing your emotions. And if you are brave enough to let yourself go through the entire emotional alchemy, the entire cycle, you will actually put it to rest. It gets to move through you. You get the lessons, but it's no longer stuck, trapped in you. And so the cycle of emotional alchemy, if you will, is that there's a stimulus. You become aware of it. You sit with it. You allow it to expand. You allow it to fully be there. So there's and I think acceleration is the word I'm using, but like an ascension. And then there's a peak, and then there's a deceleration, and there's peace on the other side of that. There's like a fully processed emotion where you no longer feel bonded to it. And so when something like grief or rage comes up and you're like, fuck, this is so inconvenient. I don't want to do this, or I'm scared. And I think for a lot of us, it's like, well, what if I never stop being rageful? What if I never stop crying from grief? What if I make myself feel like a loser because something didn't work out the way that it was supposed to? It's like, well, let's sit with that loser part of yourself for a minute. Let's sit with that rage for a minute or grief, and just expand it. Just let it get bigger without stopping it. There have been moments, and I didn't realize what was actually happening was I was alchemizing my emotions, but there have been times where I've been crying so hard in the shower. I am like on the ground, like snotty, ugly, hyperventilating, ugly cries. Ugly cries. And then it peaks and it starts to decelerate. And then I have this like moment where I have perspective of what is actually happening, and I actually start laughing, or I stop crying and I just kind of sit with, and I'm like, what are you doing? Right? Because you allow yourself to fully be the expression. You allow it to expand. You allow it to contract. You allow it to peak, and then you come to this level of like peace with it. It's moved through you. When you were little, there was probably many little micro or major moments where you were about to express a really big emotion and someone stopped you and someone told you it doesn't hurt that bad. It's not that sad. Stop crying. All these things where you're like, that I feel sad, but my caregiver is telling me I shouldn't be. So therefore I'll stop it because my survival is dependent on their acceptance. And so we get really confused. And this is why I talk a lot about domestication or the good girl conditioning, because we eventually are conditioned to be acceptable to others so that we can have their love. It's not conscious, but this is the game we play. This is the stories that are happening behind the scenes. And we start policing ourselves without really realizing how much we are policing ourselves. And this confusion creates a bunch of emotionally detached, anxious and exhausted and burnt out individuals who don't know how to feel their feelings and might pretend that they're not there. There are, the women who tell me they don't have rage, I think they have the most rage, but they are so good at self-policing it. So, because it's just such a big statement. Like, are you kidding? Nothing has made you rage, Flynn? Like, you don't have the normal spectrum of human emotions? Like, I call bullshit. There's no way. And I have seen women sitting across from me that are like their rage and resentment, their hurt, their pain is so palpable. It is like piercing. It's piercing and it's trapped. And when you look at the physical expression of that, it is not surprising that it shows up in like extra insulation and protection on the body, like increased fat mass, emotional eating. The amount of women who tell me they've now tuned into how much they eat their feelings. They eat when they're happy, they eat when they're sad, they eat when they're scared, because it is so uncomfortable for us to sit with and alchemize that we literally look at our physical circumstance and environment and what we have access to palliate, to satiate, like to pretend it's not happening. You might use TV, you might use Netflix and chill, you might use online shopping, you might use food. Like there are so many ways we avoid alchemy of our emotions, like the processing of our emotions, and pretend they're not happening. And there is a consequence. There is a consequence to not letting yourself or permitting it to move through you. There is a consequence in the energetic sphere. It causes stagnation and irritation and sleeplessness and all of these things. There is a physical manifestation. It can show up as dis-ease. It can show up as increased weight. It can show up as, increased inflammation. Like, it is wild how much our emotional state impacts our physical health and well-being. And depending on where you are on your own journey with integrative health, you either think I'm wacky for saying that, or you're like, no, duh, duh. And I welcome you, because there's always a level of deeper learning there and wisdom. And I think that's one of the gifts that I have, or that we share in a wild circle, is that there's this space to start to process this and untether from this and permit emotional alchemy in a very, very safe way and co-regulate, and made me a better clinician. It made me someone who wasn't afraid to confront it head on and really help sit with women to not be afraid of this, knowing that their best, most beautiful, most aligned, coherent, peaceful life was on the other side of the alchemy. And I just really wanted to bring that to the table for you, that one of the most beautiful gifts that I was given, when you follow the nudges, and that will be part 2, because following the nudges is a beautiful concept that I fully let myself experience when I went on this Calgary trip, because it was healing in so many ways. Being brave enough to ask my husband to go, because it wasn't convenient. It wasn't a convenient time, but I really felt like I was supposed to be there to talk to my friend about it, and then to make that opportunity happen, to let myself be led and learn that I'm never alone, that I'm divinely guided, and there's wonderful people everywhere to catch you and support you, and the world is not scary. And for the majority of my life, I feel a deep sense of fear around things, and I go to a lot of events where I don't know anybody, and every time I'm like, why do you do this to yourself? You hate this. I do. I find it really hard, and yet I am a glutton for punishment, in the sense of I am on this pursuit of a beautiful life and putting myself outside and pushing myself to get outside of my comfort zone and to curate and evolve and expand and not tolerating fear, not tolerating subpar life, not tolerating things staying trapped. I lived outside of my body for majority of my life. It did not feel safe. It felt chaotic. It felt scary. And to invite in these moments where grief just hits you. I didn't even think I had that much grief around it, because so much of my year last year was spent a bit in a frozen state, like pretending things weren't as bad as they were, that it was going to sort itself out miraculously somehow. It was just like this frozen state of inaction, because I didn't really know how to process the big emotions that were coming up for me. I felt deeply hurt by certain things. I felt so disappointed in myself. I felt like I failed my family. Like, there was so much there. And so I froze as an old pattern. I started to take action and move in a different direction. I could see myself finding momentum again, in my footing and my confidence and my trust and my faith, and all these pieces coming back online. But what hadn't been dealt with yet was the grief. And when I gave myself that alone time, and I had a lot of alone time that trip, which I really cherish, and it makes me a better wife and mother and human to get some alone time. I am that extroverted introvert who recalibrates in quiet and in deep introspection or contemplation of my own thoughts. And yeah, there was just like this beautiful space permitted, and the right kinds of conversation, which is obviously what I was tuning into as to why I was supposed to be there, that really talked about grief head on. And there was a safe enough space for me to just feel my feelings and cry a lot and process all of that. And I came home and I felt like an energized woman. I felt so excited about what was to come. I felt reinvigorated and ready to take things on and take on a new challenge. And the level of discipline and motivation and inspiration I've had this summer to course correct, to pivot and move towards inspiration and expansion versus sitting in the discomfort of things not working. It was so beautiful. It was so beautiful. And I really felt like we needed to bring this conversation to the table, because grief needs better PR. Emotional alchemy is normal and is essential for a beautiful, expansive life of of presence, of having a lust for life force, meaning like you are in the pulse of your life, good, bad, ugly, you're in it, and all parts are okay. And the second I started to accept and love those parts of myself, life got a lot more beautiful, and I could see and I could genuinely tap into the gratitude and beauty of my life because I was seeing things differently. And so that's what I want to invite for you today. One is, if you say you have rage, you don't have rage. I call bullshit. And two, that it is safe for you to feel your feelings. In fact, it is the only way through. And it is the only way it no longer holds you hostage, and you get to take the wisdom and move beyond. And I hope that inspires you for another day, for another week, for another year to become more comfortable in your own skin and to invite whatever needs to come up for you, because you are beautiful and perfect as you are. And the more you know yourself and your capacity to alchemize is going to be directly correlated to how beautiful you feel your life is. Stay wild. Thank you so much for tuning in to Wild Medicine. I am so grateful to have you here, and I hope you're feeling inspired and empowered. If you enjoyed today's episode, please don't forget to subscribe and leave a 5-star rating. It helps us reach more incredible women just like you. And before you go, quick reminder, the information shared on this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose or treat any medical condition. Please consult with your healthcare provider for personalized advice and care. And if you're ready to take inspired action and dive deeper into your own health journey, please visit us at poppyclinic.com. Let's rewild and reset your health together.